Everyone is attached to their possessions. I don't know where I'd be without my watch, for example, but some people and spirits can be literally attached to their belongings. So tonight, I'll share with you some allegedly true scary stories of haunted objects. That's right, you're about to have a fight to the death with your staple remover. Now let's get on to those scary stories. It started off as a normal night, nothing particularly off. At the time of these events, I was 12 years old, living in a small town rather known for paranormal happenings. But those sort of stories usually stuck to the ordinary abandoned shack, certainly not a small computer screen in a bubbly neighborhood. Per usual, I was passing time playing some online games. Nothing weird was going on yet, but the night was young. As the sun grew dim outside my window, I noticed an eerie feeling rise somewhere within me. But I passed it off as paranoia, probably from watching too many scary movies. So I continued to click away at my computer, eyes fixed on the monitor, when I heard a light raking at my window. I peered around the corner towards the window but saw nothing there. I had no idea what that could have been. So I went back to my computer. Before I knew it, I heard the same sound again, but now it sounded like it was coming from the wall directly behind me. Instantly, I was covered in goosebumps. I did not dare turn around. I was scared for what I might see, so I sat there staring at the computer screen. I was beyond creeped out at this point. After re-engrossing myself into the game, I started to notice things from my peripheral vision. At first, it was just flashes, short, inconsistent movements, but soon I saw a dark figure there for more than a second each time. Slowly but surely, with each sight, my life felt more and more in danger. Suddenly, my computer began to glitch up, slightly at first, then became more noticeable. At first, it was like a small magnet was being rubbed against the side of the monitor, the user interface being bent and twisted. Then the visual signal began to cut out, pixels going to black and then coming back to color, all randomly. As time progressed, these glitches became hard to ignore. The scratching became evident on my back wall again, though I had to listen carefully. They were there. In total and fearful denial, I tried to focus on my computer with all my might, but I couldn't. Something was there with me, and I had no idea what it was. Between the glitches and movements and scratching, everything became too much and I pinched my eyes closed, and suddenly everything stopped. After a long moment, I decided to reopen my eyes, and what I saw when I opened them will forever haunt me. Something was sitting atop my computer, tapping at the screen, which was no longer displaying any graphics of any kind. I can only describe this thing as a demon or a shadow person. It was all black and looked like a shadow, but was darker than anything I'd ever seen. It looked physical, though, like if I reached out to touch it, I would feel something there. The only true feature on the being before me was the eyes. Its eyes weren't completely colorless, more of a piercing red when I looked into them. I felt the sensation of anger and hatred. At that moment, I couldn't breathe. I was so terrified, but as soon as it came, it disappeared. It seemed to dissolve in front of me, into what seemed like a mist that spread out until it wasn't visible anymore. I don't think I'll ever be able to get that image out of my head, and I'm sure I'll remember this experience forever. To this day, my computer still glitches up the same way it did that night, and sometimes I'm afraid that I'll blink and sitting atop my computer will be that dark figure and its piercing red eyes. Story number 2. I don't know what is happening to me, so I'm sharing it here in hopes I will find some answers. First, I have to give some information that will be important later. My mother works the night shift and usually comes home at around 6 or 7 in the morning. I always hear her when she comes home because my room is right next to the front door with only a wall separating us and my headboard is up against the wall. There is even a big bell that hangs on the doorknob. I also have a clock which sits on my nightstand right next to my bed, so when I'm laying on my left side, I can see it clearly. And that clock has been showing me the wrong time for a long time. I know this because sometimes when my mom has come home, I'll look up at the clock and it'll say something other than 6 or 7 in the morning, usually showing the time between 2 and 12 p.m. Later in the day when I'm awake, I would go to reset it, though by then when I got around to it, the time wouldn't be wrong anymore, as if it reset itself, which just isn't possible. Now, I didn't think much of it at first. I just chalked it up to it being an old clock. But one night, I looked at my phone to check the real time, and it said the exact same time it was on the clock on the nightstand, which was 12:30. I knew this was wrong because I checked my phone before going to sleep, and it said it was 2:30 in the morning. So now my phone and clock were both incorrect. I kind of got a little freaked out, and I thought it was odd. So I got up and went into the kitchen to check the time on the microwave and the oven, and again it said 12:30. Everything said 12:30. I even checked the DVD player, but it was the same. I began to try and rationalize why this was happening, and I came up with the conclusion that the power must have gone out or something around that time. This seemed likely as we had been getting some snow. I just didn't notice it when I came home from work. But that conclusion didn't really explain why my cell phone was showing the same time. Power or no power, my phone had a charged battery. So just in case, I decided to turn my phone off and on again. I hoped that would fix it. Maybe it was just a bizarre coincidence. But when I turned back on, it still showed 12:30. This is when I began to get a bit scared, so I decided to call my mom. She didn't answer, but that wasn't odd. She was at work. In the end, still freaked out, I went back to bed anyway. For a week, the same thing kept happening to all the clocks. But the time had changed. They would now show between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. One night, a little after the first week I noticed this, I heard my mom coming through the door and I looked at my clock. It said 6 in the morning. Thinking it was just her, I closed my eyes, trying to go back to sleep, just as she closed the door. Now a few minutes passed and I heard the door opening and shutting again. I was still thinking it was my mom. Maybe she forgot something in the car, so she went back out. I just laid there with my eyes still closed. But it happened again, the door opening and closing. Of course, this could have been my mom coming back inside after getting the thing that she forgot. But it just kept happening, so I decided I would get up. If it really was my mom, maybe she needed help with something. As I was pushing my covers off, I glanced at the clock again. It said 5:57 in the morning. When I saw that, I felt a rush of fear go through me. At the time, I thought I was being stupid. It was just my clocks being dumb clocks. But as I walked out into the hallway and turned around, I saw my bedroom door open and then close by itself, right before my eyes. I stood there frozen with shock, not at all believing what I just saw. But the coldness picking at my skin told me otherwise. Then for some reason, I thought I should look at the clock on the DVD player, and it also said 5:57. I stood there just staring at it, watching the time moving closer and closer to 6. At exactly that time, the door opened again right in front of me. I screamed and ran into my room, shutting my door just before I heard my front door close again. I sat on my bed shaking. I was almost crying. I was so scared. I called my mom, but she still didn't answer. I tried to call my best friend, but she didn't answer either. I didn't know what to do. I was just so frightened. I listened to the door opening and closing 3 more times, and suddenly, it stopped. I was too afraid to go back out there. I was too afraid to move. But I did glance over at my clock, and it read 2:49 a.m. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember my mom waking me up to tell me something. Before she could, I asked her why she didn't call me back. She looked at me for a second, and then she said she didn't get a missed call from me and asked if it was important. I said I would explain later, and then she went up to her room. I called my best friend after that, knowing she was usually up getting ready for work by now. Out of curiosity, I asked if she had missed a call from me, and she also said no. All of this still happens, and it all started with my nightstand clock. And every time I look at it now, I'm filled with this sense of dread. Story number 3. I was 12 years old in 1992 when we moved to the small town of Mountain Pine in Arkansas. I had never lived in such a small town, having grown up in Little Rock with shopping malls and people everywhere. I always had something to do or some friend to hang out with back then. Therefore, the move to a small town was very hard on me. Our new home was out in the woods, with a dirt lane about a quarter of a mile long. If we had neighbors, they definitely were not within shouting distance. I was lonely and bored except for when I was at school. so I spent a lot of time watching TV or playing Nintendo when I was home. One evening, after a serious amount of time watching old videos, I couldn't hold my eyes open anymore. Dozing off to sleep, something strange happened. Now, I had already fallen asleep on the couch at least 3 or 4 times by then, so I figured I might as well take my butt to bed. I turned off the TV and all the lights. I didn't check the locks because back then that was not my job, but my parents'. I had crawled into bed and wrapped myself up like a burrito in my blankets. And as I was just dozing off, I heard a loud electrical static sound. I looked towards my bedroom door, which was open because I was a little nervous when being in the dark, and I saw the illuminating light of the TV in the living room, which I could have sworn, no, I knew, I had turned it off. I decided right then that maybe the cat had stepped on the remote or something. I climbed back out of bed warily and slowly made my way back to the living room to turn the TV off again. This time, though, instead of laying the remote on the couch, I laid it on top of the TV. That way the cat could not step on it again. After that, I went back to bed and fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. I guess it was about halfway through the night, maybe even early morning, when I woke up with the urge to pee. I rolled out of bed, and once again as I entered the hallway, there was that illuminating light of the TV. I thought maybe my mom had gotten up early to watch the morning news or was drinking her coffee. That was her usual routine. But as I slowly entered the living room, I realized that there was no one in there. At this point, I'm starting to get a little creeped out. I walked through the house and checked the doors. I peeked into my parents' and sister's rooms to make sure no one was awake. I even checked the front and back doors to make sure they were locked. Everything was good and fine, and I was still about to pee on myself, so I turned off the TV and made my way to the bathroom. As I finished up, I thought to myself that maybe I should just unplug the stupid thing. So that's exactly what I did. I went back to bed after that and slept somewhat fitful the rest of the night. My mom woke me up as usual for a Monday morning at sunrise. She would yell, "Rise and shine," and scare me completely awake. As per usual, I got dressed and ready for school before I went to the kitchen for my usual toast and jelly because I had to work up a hunger to be able to eat so early. I was laying my school bag on the couch and getting ready to head into the kitchen when my mom decided to chew on me for something that I had obviously done that displeased her. I recognized that tone at once and was ready to go on the defense. She looked at me sternly and told me that I would no longer be allowed to stay up and watch TV after her and Dad went to bed, not if I couldn't be responsible enough to turn it off before I went to sleep. Immediately, I felt like my blood ran cold. As any 12-year-old might do, I blamed it on my sister. I said she must have gotten up in the middle of the night and turned it on. I told her that I had no doubt that I had turned it off and had even put the remote up. She just said that it better not happen again, or we would both lose our television privileges just to make sure she got the right one of us. It had to have been her, because if it wasn't Mom or Dad, then someone had to be there to plug it back in. This happened 3 more times over the next week, and me and my sister both got grounded from the TV. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was happening to prove my innocence. It really made me mad to get punished for something I didn't do. I decided that the first night I was free of punishment, I was going to camp out in the living room to see if I could catch my sister sneaking out of her room. Even though the event had initially scared me, I had rationalized myself into believing it had to have been my sister. It was the very next Friday night when the opportunity finally came. The grounding was over, and I asked my mom if I could sleep in the living room to stay up late. I promised I would be responsible and make sure everything was turned off. I made my pallet on the couch and got snuggled in to watch my favorite shows. As soon as I began to doze off, I made myself get up and turn off and unplug the TV from the outlet. I even took the batteries out of the remote, just in case. After I was confident that I would be able to catch my sister in the act if she tried to turn the TV on, I curled up on the couch and went to sleep. It was about 2 in the morning. A loud crackling and a bright light scared me so bad that when I jumped, I landed in the floor. When I managed to sit up and rub my eyes, I focused in the direction of the TV, and I saw her outlying right there in front of the screen. I jumped up and ran over to grab her by the shoulder, but when I got there, there was no one there, no shoulder to grab. The figure I saw was actually an outline of what looked like a girl on the screen of the TV itself. I stepped back, quite terrified at this point, and I can still remember that voice. She was crying and she said, "Help me." That was it for me. I ran to my parents' room and I jumped right into their bed. I scared them half to death. My dad got up and he checked the TV. It wasn't on and it was still unplugged. They let me sleep with them that night. I wasn't about to leave their sides. The next morning when we all got up, my dad plugged the TV back in, but it wouldn't come on. He took the back off and looked it over, but he wasn't much of a repairman. He decided that it must have blown a fuse or something. Then, he said if it hadn't been so old and purchased second-hand, he might get it repaired. Then he grumbled to himself that that's the last time he bought a used TV from a yard sale. I was curious, so I asked him where he had bought it exactly, and he told me. It was, after all, a small town, and the TV had to belong to someone. He told me that he bought it from the house that sits alone in the meadow right before you get to town. When I went to school Monday, I only had to ask a couple of people before I got the answer to my question. A classmate told me that the people that lived in that house were the biggest story the small town had ever had. A young woman lived there with her much older husband. They said he had married her to help her family to relieve the burden of trying to care for such a large family, and that he had given them money. Months went by after the wedding, and no one had seen the young bride. Her father had waited until one day, when the man was gone from the house, he went to check on his daughter. When he finally found a way into the house, he found the body of his young daughter tied to the table that the TV was on. She had been tortured and apparently beaten to death. I have no doubt that I saw her ghost or the shadow of who she was. I will have to agree with my parents on this matter, though. I don't think I'll ever purchase anything used either. This was fairly recent, and honestly, I'm still shaken up by it. Let me give you some background. I'm a 16-year-old who never fits in, and my parents think I'm insane. The house this encounter took place in was in Ohio, where I was born and raised. The people who live there are my relatives, and they aren't exactly normal people. We all have those oddballs in our families, right? Well, this goes way beyond odd. The man, whom we will henceforth call Jack, would flirt with my mother when she was young, and even does the same to me, so it was fairly creepy. His wife, who we'll call Jane, is a former alcoholic. She herself was pretty normal, aside from the occasional tendency to act extremely awkward at almost every family outing. She respects privacy, unlike Jack. Jack is the kind of person to talk your ear off every chance he gets, and he'll even talk to strangers for as long as possible. Maybe he's just lonely, but it can get pretty creepy. They've been married for many years, and they've always had a strange connection to the house in which they live. The house itself is right on the edge of a forest, with broken and rusty playground equipment out back. It's on the top of a steep hill, and is extremely old, though I don't know the exact age of the home. What I'm about to tell you will seem fake, it will seem made up, and it'll seem outlandish, but it happened. I know another witness to these events, and I'm sure he may still have the recordings. I never want to go back to that house because of what I saw, heard, and experienced. Whatever is in that house, whatever is out in those woods, it's not human. Maybe it used to be, but it's not now, not anymore. My name is Sydney, and this is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. It was July 4th of 2016. I was staying at a relative's house for the night. Mind you, these are those rich, snobby-type relatives, so of course I had to deal with it. After all, big money on that side of the family, and we're broke. I'm the connection between the two, so again, of course, I had to deal with that. But it was just one night, so what's the big deal? Well, let me tell you, the whole insane encounter started pretty early my first day there. Jack and Jane have a motion sensor in their spare bedroom, which on its own is a little strange. When the sensor goes off, and it's not particularly sensitive either, it makes the sound of a group of dogs barking. I was sitting in the living room and I kept hearing that motion sensor go off. I would look at the clock every time it did, and I realized it went off in exactly 5-minute intervals. After what felt like the 900th time hearing that thing go off, I went down the hall to see if Jane or Jack was working in that bedroom. But there was nobody there. They don't own any pets, so that gave me chills. What was making it go off? And that's when I saw her. I turned around, and in the dresser mirror in the hallway I saw a little girl. She wore what looked like a pink nightgown, which was caked in mud and dirt. Her hair, which was a dark brown, was long and curled back behind her face, and her face was ashen gray. Her skin seemed to be pulled tight over her cheekbones. Her eyes were a dark bluish green and looked sunken into her face, and her lips were cracked. She wasn't some transparent ghostly phantom. It was as if a real little girl was standing right in front of me. I swallowed back a scream, and I froze. I just stared at her while she stared at me. She would shift her weight, fidget, her shoulders moved as if she breathed. The room felt cold as ice. It really seemed like it was just some starved little girl behind me, but I knew that was impossible. Jack and Jane had no young children in the house. Their 2 daughters were grown up and moved out. Suddenly I turned around and I saw nothing behind me. My fear slammed down on my chest like an anvil. I turned back to the mirror, but the girl was no longer there. I stayed petrified in the spot for another moment, then I bolted up the stairs into my bedroom. I used Skype to immediately call my friend, and I hurriedly explained what I had seen. Of course, he didn't believe me. Nothing else happened until later that night, 4 hours after the Skype call began. The huge mirror attached to the temporary bedroom's closet door did little to ease my fears, as it was in a mirror that I had first seen that girl. Me and my friend spent most of my Skype call silent, me watching TV and him playing video games. I only kept the call going because I did not want to be completely alone. As I switched channels, he suddenly broke the long silence, asking me what I had said. When I told him I didn't say anything, he just went, "Oh." Then we lapsed back into silence. Not long later, he spoke up again saying, "Okay, what do you want, Sid?" Again I replied with, "I didn't say anything. I hadn't heard anything either." He requested I turn off the TV and sit in silence for a while, so I did. And without warning he said, "Who else is in that room?" I replied, "No one. I'm alone." I even turned on my camera to prove the fact. He went and got a recorder. It was eerily silent again. Then my friend caught the voice that I couldn't hear on tape. It was a child's voice, a little girl, simply saying, "Don't go out." I was terrified. No, not terrified. That would be such an understatement. It's insane. He had me whisper the same words into the mic in the highest pitch I could to try and sound like this voice. He didn't believe me when I said it wasn't me. The voices weren't even remotely similar anyway. The whispers into that mic continued until I finally gave up on being scared. I was angry. I was frustrated. Why could my friend hear this thing, but not me? And why did I see it, and who was it? I got frustrated to the point where I began to taunt it. As soon as I said, "Why don't you just show yourself?" My friend said he heard a giggle, and this time I heard it too. It was the most bone-chilling sound I'd ever heard, crystal clear and right next to me. I looked towards it, but nobody was there. And then I turned to the mirror, and sure enough, the little girl was there. She stood with a huge grin. Broken and decayed teeth shone in all their glory. My friend was demanding why I was starting to whimper and cry, and all I could choke out was, "She's right there." He demanded I turn on the camera and take a picture and do something. But all I could do was stare. My muscles would not obey the commands my brain were screaming at them. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. I simply couldn't move. I screamed, but no sound would come out of my mouth. Suddenly, I forced my eyes to close. I felt like I would be sick if I kept looking at this little girl. When I eventually dared to open my eyes again, she was gone. And I could move, and I was absolutely horrified. I did not want to leave the room, but at the same time, I didn't want to be in there. I decided to stay, sitting in a silent call again with my friend. At dinner, I asked Jack about it. I wanted to know if there were any deaths in the area. He looked at me weird and said no, so I got more specific, and I asked if any kids had gone missing or died. He was extremely quiet. Now, if you read the background, you'll understand why this was such a huge red flag. He refused to talk about it. Either he knew something and didn't want to tell, or he couldn't tell. Either way, it was alarming. The whispers continued, and we tried to make sense of them. After eventually deciding the girl I'd seen in the mirror was the girl we were hearing, we were able to get a tentative possible name, but I can't recall what it was, and honestly, I don't care. As the night went on, things got worse. The door kept creaking open, even when I locked it, and once, when the door was slightly ajar, I saw her in the mirror, standing in the hallway and peeking into the slightly open door. I began to cry, and I firmly closed my eyes, got up, and closed the door as hard as I could. The air around it was cold. I propped a chair up on the handle in an effort to stop it from opening again. The chair was moved, and the door was open as soon as I turned around, after returning to my spot by the TV. At one point, with the Skype call still going, I left to use the bathroom. When I came back, the room had been torn apart. Books were knocked off the shelves, chairs were turned over, my iPad had been moved. I picked it back up and asked what had happened. My friend said he thought I was in the room. He'd heard humming and things moving around, but I hadn't been there. As the evening went on, the voice became more malevolent, more angry, and more dark. I covered that creepy mirror with a blanket. I simply couldn't stop thinking about looking at it, and I knew if I looked into the mirror, I could see that girl again, and that was the last thing I wanted. But little did I know things would get far worse. That night, I was so scared to go to bed. My friend actually read me to sleep. I had to sleep in the room where I'd seen a little girl, a girl who wasn't really there, watching me. Even now, as I type the story, I feel like something is there, looking at me. A weight in my chest I can't explain. As he read to me, he would pause as he heard whispers. When he stopped, when the call was ended and the house was silent and all I was left with was myself, I tried to drown out the thoughts in my head. I told myself the extra weight on the bed beside me was just my imagination. I told myself the small, icy hand touching my back was not real. I told myself the voice in my ear was just my thoughts getting the better of me. I told myself she wasn't laying right next to me. I told myself that she was trapped in that mirror. But I knew I was wrong. The next time you even think about buying that old Dybbuk box at a yard sale or opening up an old dusty book, just remember, spirits of the dead, spirits of the evil, they roam the world, looking for any chance to enter our plane of existence. Even if it means possessing that old mirror in the corner of your room, be careful out there, within your own home. You never know who or what is watching. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and we will see you in the next video.